Let's bring in tonight's panel, contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker, and Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. I mean, Alan, a circus, a disgrace, shameful. It doesn't change anything at home, as we were hearing there from Sam, but just their inability to sort of have an actual debate and discussion.
Just extraordinary. I mean, here you have an important international issue that I think everyone wanted to have some discussion over. The whole saga started because the Labour Party was scared of addressing the SNP's motion. The Conservatives got in on the game by throwing in a wrecking amendment, as it were, but they're entitled as a government. And then the extraordinary spectacle of the Speaker taking this amendment from Labour in clear contravention of precedent in the House of Commons and then having to apologise for it. The whole thing has collapsed into a charade, and it's just shameful.
Michael?
I mean, in terms of parliamentary sort of manoeuvring, Labour are going to be very pleased because they've avoided a vote that they would have found awkward. I do think it seems like Lindsay Hoyle acted against precedent, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has to resign. I would push back against the idea that because this is a farce, we can assume none of this mattered. Because I do think this vote in Parliament mattered. Keir Starmer is very likely to be the next Prime Minister. And this was really a test of him. So the SNP put down a very clear motion, which was calling for an immediate ceasefire and saying that Israel is sort of carrying out collective punishment against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Now, for me, it would be important to see whether or not Keir Starmer is willing to stand behind a strong position such as that. I mean, obviously he wasn't. He was going to whip against it. But he was going to face a rebellion from his MPs, who, again, are likely to be the MPs in government soon. And so I think it would have been really important for that SNP motion to be heard and to be voted on, because now Labour say, oh, we've passed our motion, but that's because no one else voted. And also, by the way, it's a much weaker motion than the SNP's was in the first place, because it gives Israel loads of get-out clauses. Yes, let's have a ceasefire, but only if you can assure Israelis that they'll never be subject to an October the 7th style attack.
While we continue to sort of debate this, though, the war rages on, ultimately.
Exactly. But again, I'm not saying you're trying to do this at all, but there is a sort of danger, I think, of saying, oh, look at us here, it doesn't matter what we say. Britain has a seat on the Security Council, a permanent member of the Security Council. We fund Israel. If we wanted, we could have some serious influence. We could say to Israel, you don't get to use 100 hostages as a reason to carry out a total war against one of the most densely populated parts of the world, right?
I'm definitely not saying we don't have influence.
No, I know you're not saying that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think I would have liked a debate on the subject because I'm quite convinced the House of Commons would have come to a different place. I don't think they would have taken Michael's point there. I don't think they'd have voted for the SNP amendment. I think a majority of the House of Commons would quite comfortably have voted for a fair ceasefire, a ceasefire that starts with hostages, Israeli hostages, being released, which then goes into what happens after that and the question of where Hamas stands on this situation, and would come out in a fair place. Everyone, including Israel, and I think, is looking for a way out of this conflict for it to end. But it has to end not on the idea that the Israelis are somehow responsible for the mess, but that Hamas is, which Hamas was from day one.
Well, I mean, I suppose my interpretation of the Henry Jackson Society, you're supposed to be hard-headed realists. Now, why would Hamas accede to Israel's demand? So Israel is essentially saying, release all the hostages, we might have a break for a few weeks, and then we will start bombarding Gaza again until we have completely destroyed you. What organisation in the world is going to agree to those terms? So,
well, don't start a conflict that you're going to inevitably lose that'll force you into that position.
So now you're talking about collective punishment, I think, which
no.
I'm
talking about Hamas being forced out.
Parliament.
Hamas being forced out.
Well, so there's two issues, isn't there? Hamas being forced out of government and Hamas being totally destroyed. Now, I think what the Israelis are showing they want to do is to completely flatten Gaza. 70% of buildings currently destroyed, 29,000 people dead. Now, they would say this is so that we can be safe in the future and this is so we can get Hamas out of power. You've also got ministers very high up in that government, the finance minister, the security minister, sort of heading up conferences where they're talking about resettling Gaza. So I think to sort of play along with this Israeli idea that this is a defensive war.
I don't think it's playing along. I think the reality is that were the hostages to be released tomorrow, were Hamas to leave tomorrow, don't mean military smash, but actually leave.
Surrender and
leave.
What does that mean?
Well, like Yasser Arafat left Beirut in 1982. He left Beirut and he went to Tunis, basically. That was enough from that situation to say that the PLO had gone.
And that's also when we had the Sabra and Shatila massacre, right? So the PLO left and then Israel allowed fascist Lebanon troops
to the PLO sort of situation. The reality here is Hamas have to go, because you talk about hard-headed realism. There can only be movement and proper peace in this region if Hamas is not a part of it. Hamas has no role
Alan,
here.
are you saying wave a white flag, say we surrender?
Yes. I'm saying accept the inevitable. You've started a war. that you didn't think would end in this way. You thought somehow that it would end in a different way, and you have to accept responsibility for your actions. And if you care about your people, you should leave now, and the war ends tomorrow. Remember that, it ends tomorrow.
So I think we've got a problem where you're saying they started it, so Israel is justified in anything it's done. Now, that's exactly what people who defended Hamas on October the 7th would say. Israel occupied Gaza, they've been occupying it for 56 years, and therefore they have to accept the response. No, it's under international law, it's been under occupation because they control what goes in and what comes out.
Egypt, there's a country called Egypt to the south of Gaza, which also has control. So the idea that Israel is in charge of this is nonsense, geographically nonsense.
But it's territory controlled by Israel.
Okay, well, we've got literally no time left on this topic. We will continue the conversation, and we'll also keep talking about this issue